Hello everyone, welcome to Global Government News. Today is Sunday, January 16th, 2011, and I'm Darko. Welcome everyone to part 2 of this economic news bulletin. I may have to split this into 3. Actually, I know I will have to because I've already changed the first video to part 1 of 3. So I have a lot of news articles. I didn't include a video in the beginning of this one so I can, just for basically time's sake. So I get all these articles in here because, like I said, they're going to get more interesting as we move forward. So new listeners, please visit my website at www.ggnonline.com. That's ggnonline.com. I post all my videos there, and I also have a little poll that I put up there as well. This first one up is about unemployment. More U.S. people claim jobless benefits. The number of Americans seeking benefits has risen by 35,000 to a seasonally adjusted 445,000 for the week ending January 8th. This is where we finished off. It said it is the highest level since late October, the Washington Times reported. It said applications usually rise in early January as soon as the holiday season comes to an end. It said U.S. Labor Department attempts to modify the unemployment benefits figures to answer for seasonal factors. However, many experts regard the data in early January less reliable because of seasonal fluctuations. Chinese yuan, among world's safest currencies. The Chinese yuan is, quote, one of the safest currencies in the world, global investment expert Jim Rogers said on Wednesday. The next one up, and from an economic assassin, it says here, Chinese yuan, a new world reserve currency, only a mere 12 days into the new year, 2011, and China has already set the wheels in motion to use their most powerful weapon, the yuan, in order to combat inflation. This may well be the first decision of many that will result in the yuan being phased in as a new world reserve currency. Instead, a stronger exchange rate will be the tool that China uses in order to tame their inflationary problems at the present. The biggest increases being felt as a result of the inflation at this time are the Chinese housing market, which was most dramatically affected in the southern industrial hub of Guangzhou, and where home prices soared by 38% in the past year. Another sector heavily affected was Chinese groceries, with the cost of some goods increasing by 50%, and that was for food. It says euro surges by 3.6% versus dollar in the week. Strong debt auctions, surprising comments from the European Central Bank's president, catapulted the euro to its biggest weekly gain against the dollar in more than half a year. It says here, U.S. state considers alternative to dollar. How about this? The Commonwealth of Virginia is planning to file a bill under which it would begin minting its own gold and silver coins as an alternative currency to the U.S. dollar. And that's a pretty big deal, of course, because, I'm kind of like for a stateless society and all that. And kind of a real sound monetary policy, which would consist of something backed by something with intrinsic value, and not just something that's fiat, and something that we attach a value to. And so this is what they're going for. And so, if I wasn't for a stateless society, I'd be for a confederation of states. I wouldn't be for a union of states. And, one of the biggest things is competing currencies. Now, see, we're always taught that in the re-education and indoctrination camps known as, educational schools, that's why, one of the reasons why we got out of Confederation of States, it was too hard to conduct commerce. It's like, okay, it's not that hard, countries have been doing it for a long time, especially in Europe, where Europe is basically, it's not the size of the United States, but I'm just saying, it's big. If you can imagine all those countries, each being states, that's what they are now. They've been unionized like us, but before they were kind of like a confederation of states, where each state was their own country, and they could compete with currencies based off their own sovereign debt and what they were doing, what they were manufacturing, what they were exporting and importing. It had to do with an individual sovereign state. So hopefully that makes sense to you, but it's always good to have competing currencies. It says here, Virginia's Republican delegate Bob Marshall from Prince William County was to ask the General Assembly to consider an idea Wednesday when it convenes in its annual legislative session, the Washington Post reported. It is a companion bill to a proposal Marshall has already filed to establish a study committee to examine alternative currencies to that distributed by the Federal Reserve System, quote, in the event of a major breakdown of the Federal Reserve System. U.S. currency legislation less of a threat for China. U.S. legislation pressing for a rise in the yuan currency looms as less of a threat for China on the eve of President Hinato's visits to Washington now that the Republicans control one house of the Congress. Like it really freaking matters. Next up this is pretty good, perpetual war for employment. This is something that occurred in between World War I and World War II. It's a little known, I don't want to say it's a little known fact, but it's something that people don't put in consideration as far as unemployment goes and in our history, and then equate that or relate it to war and how war actually is good for unemployment, and it helps these corporatists, these international fascists who profit from both sides of wars. Talking about the military-industrial complex, and each sovereign nation has to somehow, when they're in an economic turmoil after the bankers basically hijacked the economy, blown out a bubble and stole a bunch of money and bet against the economy and won, like Goldman Sachs, you have little downtimes, little periods of unemployment, like high unemployment, like now. And so what do? Well, you want to make sure that you keep all the military, the soldiers and the Marines and the sailors in, because if you don't, they're going to come back to a country with no jobs. You see how that works? And that's how unemployment was fixed between World War I and World War II. It says here it says, we remain convinced that America's serial wars have continued deepened that the great country's economic crisis, and that this gives rise to a peculiar dilemma that we don't usually point out, but which will be a purpose of this article. It may well explain the reluctance of the U.S. to leave Afghanistan and to generally disengage from overseas violence. It says, how can the U.S. cease its warring when so many people in that belligerent country depend on conflict for their employment? The U.S. employment or underemployment rate, the real one, is somewhere between 25 and 30%. To reduce or eliminate garrisons in both Iraq and Afghanistan would inject hundreds of thousands of additional individuals into the economy that is struggling to provide employment to available workers, not to mention the private sector defense jobs that would be made redundant. And it says here, and assuming that the additional workers find jobs, wouldn't they be at substantially lower salaries than their existing military compensation? Well, they do. We covered that. Downturns ugly trademark, steep, lasting drop in wages. And you know what? Go through and read this, because I hate when they do this. They turn it into a feature article where it's about, Kevin Cronin lost 150. It doesn't really tell you facts. So we'll skip to this. The link is posted if you want to check that out. Wage drop has been worst in decades. Wages for American workers have fallen dramatically since the financial takeover, in what will likely turn out as the worst such plunge since the Great Depression, the Wall Street Journal reports. It said when hard times hit, employers typically are reluctant to reduce wages, but this downturn has been different. See, it's a restructuring, because it's not a recovery, it's a restructuring. It's about all the big companies and big banks taking out the smaller banks, and then the usual slave citizen, subject, consumer, basically working more and harder for less. It says, and of course, that dollar that you're working more for less, and then that dollar that you're getting, the less that you're getting, is actually worth less because of inflation. So you actually lose out at least 50%, right? It says here more than half of the workers who found new work by early 2010 after losing jobs between 07 and 09 said their pay had dropped, according to the Labor Department data, the Wall Street Journal. A full 36% said the new job had paid 20% less than their former one. And I thought I saw a little chart here, but I guess I don't have it. GDP growth forecast to slow down. World Bank predicts economy to expand by 8.7% and drive Asian boom. The country's GDP growth rate will slow to 8.7% this year from 10% in 2010. A key challenge in 2011 will be to ensure that the anti-inflationary measures do not significantly reduce growth, the World Bank said on Thursday. Obama orders military to prepare for spring food riots. And this is where it gets interesting, guys. A grim report prepared by France's General Directorate for External Security obtained by Russia's Foreign Intelligence Service states that President Obama's and Sarkozy have agreed in principle to create a joint U.S.-European military force to deal exclusively with a global uprising expected this spring as our world runs out of food. According to this report, and I actually reported on this, Sarkozy talking about food prices and legislating some kind of force or some kind of solution. Well, I guess this is it. According to this report, Sarkozy, as a head as head of the G20 group of the developed nations, called for and received an emergency meeting with Barry Soetoro this past Monday at the White House, wherein he warned his American counterpart that the shock rise in food prices occurring due to an unprecedented series of disasters was threatening the stability of the entire world and could lead to the outbreak of total global war. So you can go in there and check this out. UN warning about high food prices as well. Unilever chief warns over global crisis in food output. The chief executive of one of the world's largest food producers is to warn that the global crisis in food production is reaching, quote, dangerous territory with prices soaring and demand outstripping supply. In a speech on Tuesday, Paul Pullman, the chief executive of Unilever, will say that market distortions created by European Union subsidies work against the needs of the developing world. Global food chains stretched to the limit. Soaring prices spark fears of social unrest in developing world. Strained by rising food and battered by bad weather, the global food supply chain is stretched to the limit, sending prices soaring and sparking concerns about a repeat of food riots last seen 3 years ago. It said signs of the strain can be found from Australia to Argentina, Canada to Russia, and Chile and India, among other countries as well. Poverty soars as millions of Americans head to food banks. I already covered this, but just so you know. Here we go. How commodity prices are driving up the cost of UK food. Why you can expect to pay more for cereals, meat, and coffee in 2011. Talks about grains. Wheat was hit a record high in the UK of more than £200 per ton. And it says there have been droughts in Russia and the Ukraine. It says meat, and when the prices of grains begin to rise, the cost of feeding animals does as well. So that's the reason for the increase of meat prices. Coffee, among the dozens of commodities reaching record peaks. Arabica, I know it's about Arab, but anyways, Arab coffee reached a 13-year high on Wednesday. Supplies have been affected by the disease in Colombia. And it says here, sugar, the outlook for sugar is less certain because it's already been trading at a 30-year high for a while. Some analysts believe the commodity is due for a correction. And let's see, cocoa, and then, of course, you can go in there and check that. That's pretty much everything. China, Korea move underscore rising food prices. China dumped plans to import several million tons of expensive corn in 2011, and South Korea unveiled cuts in important tariffs on some products, underscoring the dilemma over how to tackle rising food prices. In India, where vegetable prices have risen more than 70% in the past year, the finance minister said the government would unveil measures later on Thursday to combat inflation. However, a rally in grain prices after a U.S. report on Wednesday warned of dwindling global supplies suggested further price pressures may be in the pipeline. World food prices hit a record high in December after adverse weather affected crops. The UN's food agency said in a report last week that raised concerns about inflation, protectionism, and social unrest, factors that contributed to the 2008 food crisis. And keep moving here into foreclosures. Home foreclosures in 2010 topped 1 million for the first time. Banks seized more than 1 million U.S. homes in 1 year for the first time last year, despite a slowdown in the last few months, as questions around foreclosure processing arose. And remember what I was talking about in recent videos. The more houses that foreclose, and the more houses that these big 4 or 5 banks, you know what I'm talking about, the 5 banks allow these foreclosures to take place, the worse their books begin to look. The more insolvent they become. Well, they're already insolvent, but the more insolvent they appear to be, right? So that's going to mean trouble, and that's going to mean more bailouts and stimuluses for the big banks, who, of course, are helping causing all this. So it says here, U.S. banks reporting phantom income on $1.4 trillion on delinquent mortgages. The giant U.S. banks have been bailed out again from huge potential write-offs of loosey-goosey accounting accepted by the accounting profession and the regulators. It says they're allowed to accrue interest on non-performing mortgages until the actual foreclosures take place. So see, that's why they stall them. They make money. And once they let them go, oops. So here we go. U.S. home foreclosures hit 2.9 million, says a report. U.S. housing market unlikely to pick up. It says here the U.S. housing market, which is a key indicator of the country's economic vitality, is not expected to pick up by 2012. That's when all the jobs are supposed to come back, according to Bernanke, too, about 4 or 5 years. Well, I'm not going to hold my breath. Next up, over 1 million Americans seen losing homes in 2011. Next up is for housing. Housing market stalls amid lending fears. You can join us in the part 3 of this economic news bulletin. This is GGN, and I'm Darko. Thank you.